have been regular talks for familiarization on nature and environment that the school's Old Boys Society has been doing. And today we have with us very eminent scientist and Deputy Director of the Bombay Natural History Society, Dr. Vibhu Prakash. Welcome, Dr. Prakash.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you for accepting our invitation, and also for the amazing work that you have done in the field of ornithology and conservation. He's had a very illustrious career in over 40 years in the field of ornithology and nature conservation. He was the first person who in 1997 raised the alarm on the vulture crisis that we have been going through for the last 30 years. And although his PhD work was in the Keoladev Ghana National Park on the birds and the wetland ecology, he studied the now sort of extinct Sarus crane from India, as well as, Siberian crane, and the Sarus crane also in that area, and has worked across wetlands of India, looking at raptors or birds of prey around in the wetland areas. He's won several awards for his work and has published in extensively his work in international journals as well as nationally. And I think it is very important that one publishes the work that we have done, whether it is his work in biological conservation or the Journal of Zoology or Journal of Applied Ecology. The other thing that he's been working on extensively is restoration and revival of the vultures. And there are 4 centers that have been established as a starting project. It's a one-of-a-kind exercise of revival to bring back 97% or more. He'll be talking more about the vulture crisis, how the gyps vultures almost fell off the planet, and how he and his team has brought it back. So I think without too much of details into it, I welcome Dr. Prakash and hand over the forum to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll just share my screen and then. Thank you so much, Anand, for giving a great introduction. I really thank the Doon School Old Boys Society for and Kavita, Prakash, Arush, and Anand for giving me this opportunity to talk on vultures to you all, a subject which I love. So I will be talking about vultures, what role they play in an environment, and what happened to their population, and what all we are doing to bring this population back to so that they don't get extinct. So, so I will now talk about vultures. So vultures, are obligate scavengers. They never ever kill. And vultures have evolved for scavenging. They can eat almost as much, 40 to 50% of the body weight, whereas other scavengers or other animals can eat just 5% of the body weight. And they are also highly mobile. They can travel, although they are big birds, that once they get into the thermals, they can travel at the speed of 100 kilometers an hour, and they can travel long distances in search of food. Unlike the mammalian scavengers who are limited by distance, because a leopard, they can travel just 5 to 10 kilometers in a day, not much. So, but vultures, because they are travel long distances. Vultures were very common in our country, and that was because we have a huge population of cattle, and most of the since most of us don't eat beef, the cattle die a natural death, and when they die, they are usually skinned and thrown out in the open. And there were vultures. We had a population. We have an estimated population of 4 crore vultures, and they would come and finish off the carcasses. That's how keeping our environment clean. But unfortunately, we lost most of our vulture population since 1990s. So vultures are social birds. They you will always find them in a group. And you know, the way they search for food, they fly in thermals. And when they are flying in thermals, they'll keep an eye on each other, as well as on the scavengers on the ground. So if any one of them spots these scavengers going in one direction, it will come down and inspect. And if it finds an carcass, it will not come down immediately, but it will take tight circles. And that's why indicating to others floating in the sky that come, there's food. So within minutes, it has a cascading effect, and within minutes, the vultures from hundreds of kilometers come and feed on the carcass and finish it within minutes. You know, a flock of vultures can finish off a carcass of about 300 to 400 kilos, 300 to 400 kilos within half an hour or so, because they feed very fast. They have a very muscular tongue, which is vascularly serrated, and they can actually slurp meat. So they are very good at scavenging. So we have about 23 species of vultures in the world. Out of them, 16 are found in Africa and Asia. Until 2000, most of the vultures had very good conservation status. But after 2000, the vulture populations all over the world have started declining, especially in South Asia. Now, 7 of the species are critically endangered. Critically endangered means that there is a possibility of their going extinct within 10 years. So in our country, there are 9 different species of vultures. They feed on the same resource, that is the cattle carcasses, but they utilize it differently. So there is no competition. You know, in nature, the species which exist together, they have some differences in exploiting the food, so they don't have to compete. So there are 2 species, the cinereus and the red-headed vulture. These 2 species actually have very strong bill, and they can actually open the carcass, hide of a carcass. As you know, hide of a carcass is very tough. And these 2 species, they feed on tough meat and skin of the carcass. And they usually are not found in huge numbers. They were found in pairs or in small flocks. Whereas the species called scavenging, there's another species called the Egyptian vulture. This is the smallest vulture, and it usually comes when other vultures have fed on the carcass. They have finished the rest of the meat, but they feed on the meat sticking to the bones on the joints and all. They feed on bones, on meat and tendons. And they also feed on the scats of mammalian carcasses. That's a very important role they play in cleaning the environment. So, you know, when there is a carcass, you have mammalian predators also coming in. And this vulture cleans off all the scats of these mammalian scavengers. Then we have one vulture called the bearded vulture. This is found in Hawaii Mountains. And this vulture feeds on the bone marrow. So what it does when other vultures are fed on the meat, it picks up the bone, throws it on the rock, and when the bone breaks, it feeds on the bone marrow. And then you have gyp species of vultures. These species are the vultures which you normally, whenever you think of vulture, you really think of a gyp species of vulture. They are huge in size, they are long, bare neck, and they feed on soft tissues and internal organs of the animal, of the dead animal, and that forms the bulk of the body. So they are usually found in huge number, and they form 99% of the population, of the vulture population in a given area. And these were the vultures which are very common in the country. The 3 species which were resident, the white-backed, long-billed, and slender-billed. And they were, we had an estimated population of 4 crores of vultures in early 80s. And by mid-90s, most of them had gone. So when we say the vultures were very common in the country, it is now very difficult to imagine how common they were. You know, this is a picture taken in early 80s in Delhi, in Timarpur area, where there was a slaughterhouse waste dump. And it was taken by one of my colleagues working with Bombay Natural Society. And those days we were advising the Indian Air Force on how to control the population of vultures because they were so common. And as you see in this picture, that every inch of space is occupied by vultures. So we had about a population of 4 crores in this country. But now by mid 90s, we have lost most of the population. And you know, whenever there is a species which is found in great numbers, unless you monitor this population, it's very difficult to say whether they are declining or increasing. So fortunately, Bombay Natural History Society was monitoring raptors and vulture populations across the country in different national parks, outside national parks, and also along the highways and in areas of their concentration, especially at carcass dumps. So I was monitoring vulture population in Kevlar National Park. And you know, species which are very common, like vultures, like we had a population of 4 crores. Even when we had lost 50% of the population, it was a huge number. And unless you monitor them regularly, you will never be able to say whether they're declining or not. Like, for example, sparrows have also declined, but nobody really knows how much, by how much they have lost the population or whether they are actually declining. So in Kevlar National Park, when I was monitoring population in mid 80s or late 80s, we had over 353 nests of white-backed vulture in just 29 square kilometer of the national park. But by mid 90s, we had lost 50% of the population, and by 2000, most of the population of the vultures were gone in the park. Similarly, BNHS carries out nationwide surveys of vultures. We do it every 4 years. And based on these surveys, we knew that the population of vultures had declined across the country by over 95% by end of 2000. And by 2007, we had lost 99% of the population of 3 species of vultures. But fortunately, after that, we took various conservation measures. And by 2012, we knew that the population of white-backed vulture has stopped declining, and it was increasing a little bit, but the population of long-billed vulture was still declining. But there was no, but the populations were very small and they could still have gone extinct. So there was no chance of complacency. So, you know, vultures, a dead body is virtually a culture medium of bacteria and fungus. So as soon as animal dies, the fungus and bacteria, they start multiplying, and they'll multiply in millions. And once they multiply, they form spores and then go into soil and water and contaminate. And whenever they come across healthy hosts, they attack and cause disease. And what you see in this picture is not bacteria and fungus, because you cannot see it. They are microscopic. What you see is the fly larvae or maggots. They also form, they also cause disease. So, but when vultures were there, this situation will never come. Vultures will finish off everything, and there will be hardly anything then the growth of fungus and bacteria will not be there. But now vultures are not there, and this is a serious problem that is impacting human and animal health. So when vultures were there, they would, whenever a carcass was thrown out in the open, they will come in hundreds. They will cover up the carcass and feed everything which is perishable. And the feral, all the free-ranging dogs will not get anything to feed on. But now, since there are no vultures, the dogs get a lot of food. And you know, dogs are like vermin. So whenever they get a lot of food, they have bigger litter size. And dogs are also cannibals. So usually they litter at isolated places where other dogs don't get to see the pups. But now, since there's a lot of food, the dogs, they litter at carcass dumps, sometimes in the rib cages of cows, and the pups which grow up in at the carcass dumps, they are ferocious, and whenever they see humans or wild animals, herbivores, they attack. And as you know, dogs carry all sorts of diseases. Rabies is, of course, one of them, which is incurable and it kills. And but we had incidences of rabies. India has the highest incidences of rabies, so it is very difficult to quantify how much it is because of the crash in vulture population. So when the vultures started declining, we tried to find out what was killing them. So we looked at all ecological aspects which could, ecological regions which could cause the crash in vulture population. So first we looked at food, whether there's enough food available to vultures, because if there's a food shortage, the population can crash. And so we looked at food and we found that although the number of carcasses were declining, but there was still good number of carcasses to sustain a good population of vultures. So food didn't appear to be a problem to cause crash in vulture population. Then we also looked at habitat. You know, vultures are found from desert to evergreen forest, and they occupy different habitats, but wherever they are found, they usually prefer the tallest tree in the area. So we found that habitat was not actually a problem for vultures at all. Then we knew that the pesticide contamination had caused problems with birds in different parts of the country, like DDT or organochlorines almost wiped out peregrine falcon and bald eagle also from America and Europe. So we thought maybe pesticides, especially organochlorines, are killing vultures. But you know, the birds which feed on mammals usually do not have problems of, do not suffer the same kind of problems with pesticide contamination as the birds which feed on birds and fish. They suffer because there is more biomagnification in fish and birds. But still, we tested the vulture tissue samples for pesticide loads in the tissues. And we found that although there were pesticide load in vultures, but this was not enough to even cause breeding failure, and certainly not to kill them. So we concluded that pesticides was not actually a problem for the crash in vulture population. Then we found vultures sitting in peculiar, we found that vultures would often sit looking sick with their looping necks. And once these symptoms appeared, these vultures would die within 10 to 15 days. And we could follow number of vultures which are nesting. So we knew that this is what was happening. So we thought maybe the vultures are dying of a disease. So we collected vulture carcasses and we did their postmortems. We found that most of the vultures which were dying had renal failure, and because of renal failure, they were suffering from visceral gout. This is a condition when the body cannot excrete out uric acid, and uric acid gets deposited on the visceral organs, and the birds die of dehydration, because you know the other function of kidney is to reabsorb water after filtering them, and the kidney fails, they cannot do it. So most of the vultures were suffering from visceral gout, and the way the symptoms were, we thought they were suffering from a viral disease. So we started working on that, and we did isolate a very virulent herpes virus, which we thought could be killing it. But before we could conclude that study, there were scientists from Peregrine Fund, a US-based NGO working in Pakistan. They found out that they had very similar findings. They found that the vultures were dying there also, and they were dying of visceral gout. But additionally, what they found out that all the vultures which were dying of visceral gout also has residues of a drug called diclofenac. Diclofenac is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug given to cattle in pain and inflammation. So what they did, they fed vultures orally on diclofenac and as well as from meat, and the vultures died showing similar very similar symptoms as they were observed in the wild, that they died of visceral gout. So it was a very clear indication that vultures were indeed dying of diclofenac. So once they found that the vultures were dying of diclofenac in Pakistan, we tested the vulture tissue samples, which we had stored at Pinjore in Haryana in our vulture care center. And we found that 76% of the vultures in India had died of visceral gout. And when we tested their tissue samples, we found that all of them had residues of diclofenac in them. So, and we looked for availability of diclofenac, and we found that diclofenac was found almost everywhere. And it was a very popular drug for treating inflammation and pain. But when it was found that diclofenac was killing vultures, it was very difficult to believe that diclofenac would have killed vultures, so many vultures, like over 4 crore vultures in our country. Because we know that we have a huge population of cattle, but only most of the cattle is stray, and only 5% of the cattle is actually treated. And it was to be a very big coincidence that cattle should be treated by diclofenac, and it should die within 72 hours. Then vultures feed on it, and then they will die of visceral gout. And diclofenac is a wonder drug for cattle and for humans. So when it is given to a cattle, it gives it relief in pain and inflammation within 15 to 20 minutes. Similarly, it's for humans. But if the cattle dies for certain reasons within 72 hours and vultures feed on it, then they get exposed to this drug. So to find out what should be the prevalence of diclofenac, which could cause the kind of crash in vulture population we have seen. So we did mathematical modeling, and we took help of Professor Rhys Green of Cambridge University to find out what should be the prevalence. And he came out with a figure that if less than 0.8% of the ungulate carcasses available to vultures for feeding, if they have diclofenac in them, that could cause the kind of crash we have seen in vulture population. So when we did carcass sampling across the country, we found that over 11% of the carcasses had diclofenac. So it was quite very evident there were enough diclofenac which was killing vultures. And let me tell you, there are 2 things. One is a cause of mortality. There can be a number of causes of mortality, like vultures can die when there are a tree on which their nesting is cut and the nestlings and the vulture die. They can die they can get run over in an accident, or they can, there are so many reasons of mortality. But the causes of crash in populations, the crash in population happens only when there is very high adult mortality. Because in species like vultures, which are long living and slow breeding, the mortality rate of juveniles, which are from 1 to 5 years, is very high. Almost 50% of the juveniles die during first year. But once they reach 5 years of age or so, the adult mortality is very low. It's less than 5%. But population crashes when there's the adult mortality rate goes up. And that was what diclofenac was doing. That's why we say that diclofenac is the only cause of crash in vulture population. So fortunately for us, when we went to Government of India and gave them evidence that the vulture population has declined by over 97%, and diclofenac was the cause of the mortality or the crash in population, they were very quick to take action. And in 2006, they formulated a vulture action plan. And the major recommendation of the vulture action plan was to identify a safe alternative to diclofenac, which was killing vultures, and a ban on the veterinary use of diclofenac because it was killing vultures, and then to initiate a conservation breeding program. So, so what we did a global survey of various NSAIDs used in treating vultures and raptors across the globe. And we found that there were a number of NSAIDs which were used, but there was a drug called meloxicam, which has never caused mortality in any raptors or vultures in any of the zoos across the world. So we tested meloxicam on our vultures with the help of Indian Veterinary Research Institute, and we found that this drug was safe for vultures and didn't cause any mortality. So what happens when there is NSAID toxicity? The uric acid levels in the blood really shoot up if NSAID is toxic. But when diclofenac is given to animals, the uric acid levels really go up. But when meloxicam is given, nothing happens, and all the blood parameters remain normal. But only downside with meloxicam is that slow acting, and it takes almost 4 hours to give relief. But good thing is it doesn't have many side effects like diclofenac has. So it was a second generation better drug. And so we recommended to Government of India, and Government of India very promptly banned the use of diclofenac in 2006. And in the same order, they said that instead of diclofenac, meloxicam should be used in treating cattle. But very soon we realized that despite the ban on the use of on veterinary use of diclofenac, the vultures continue to die. And we found that this was because the people who treat cattle, and in India, it's not only the veterinarians who treat cattle, anybody treats cattle, whoever owns a cattle or whoever knows a little bit about medicines, they treat cattle. And we found that the human formulation, which were available in multi-dose vials of 30 to 50 ml, they were being misused in treating cattle. So these people, not the veterinarians, would buy these drugs and they will administer it to cattle. So if you get a 30 ml vial, you can typically for a cow, you need for a full-grown cow, you need about 10 to 15 ml. So you get a 30 ml vial and you can give 2 doses to the cattle, and the vultures continue to die. And actually for human, you need only a 3 ml ampule. That's all you need. But these big drug companies, because of their profit, they make multi-dose vials for humans. So we again went to the Government of India and we requested them that for human use, we should restrict the size of vials to a 3 ml ampule. And Government of India fortunately issued a gazette notification in 2015 restricting the size of multi-dose vials the size of vials for human use to just 3 ml ampule. And that really brought down the use of this drug in treating cattle. So we also simultaneously established vulture conservation breeding program in the country. Conservation breeding is not the best of conservation options. You should, whenever you have to do a conservation, it should be done in their natural habitat and wherever they occur. But when the circumstances are such that you cannot save the species in their natural habitat, you have to take, then conservation breeding program is a good option. And there are a number of examples when conservation breeding has saved species from extinction. A very good example is of Californian condor, which is like a vulture in North America, where just 21 individuals were left in the wild, and they caught all of them, and they had a very successful conservation breeding program. And now they have over 500 vultures, both in captivity as well in wild. Although they have still not been able to remove the cause of mortality, but they have saved the species from going extinct. Similarly, there's a species called Mauritian Kestrel, where only 3 birds were left. They caught up all of them, did a conservation program, and now the island thrives with this species. So there are a number of examples where you can actually save a species by doing a conservation breeding program. So we thought of establishing this. So when you think of conservation breeding program, you should know how many vultures you should breed. So when you release them in the wild, they form a self-sustaining, genetically diverse population. So these are the 3 species we thought of doing a conservation breeding program, the long-billed vulture or the Indian vulture, slender-billed vulture, and white-backed vulture. They was the most common vultures in our country, and they formed the bulk of population which was there in the country of 4 crore vultures. So the mathematical modeling showed us that if we can release 600 pairs of each of the 3 species in wild, that will form a viable population. And to get this number, we thought of having 6 different centers, and from each center, we will release 100 pairs of each of the 3 species in the wild. And to get 300 to 100 pairs from each center, we thought of having 25 pairs of each of the 3 species as found a population, and then breed them and release in the wild. So, vultures are slow breeding and long living bird. So they reach adulthood only when they are 5 to 6 years old, and they lay only 1 egg per year, and out of them only 50% reach to adulthood, and they can live up to 35 to 40 years. So you can age a vulture only till it's about 5 years old, based on its plumage and shape of the feathers. So we thought of getting young nestlings or juvenile vultures in captivity first. And vulture chicks are very easy to raise. You don't have to force open the beak and feed them. If you keep food in front of them, they pick it up and they feed on themselves by themselves. So we got nestlings and juveniles in captivity to get known age birds in a conservation breeding program. So this is a typical vulture conservation breeding center, and this is where the first center was established in Haryana near Pinjore, and it was established in 2004 when we thought of doing a conservation breeding program. So when you do a conservation breeding program, you should be very careful about the spread of disease, because once you keep birds in captivity in big flocks, you have to be careful about disease. So we have a good quarantine facility, which is about 10 kilometers away from the main center. So when we bring birds in quarantine facility, when we bring bird to the center, we take them to the quarantine facility. We keep them there for 45 days, do a thorough health check. And if they are found healthy, then only we bring to the center. And we do a 45 days quarantine because that is the incubation period of the most prevalent disease in the country in birds, called the ranicate disease. And if these birds are harboring any other disease, it will manifest within 45 days. And if the birds are healthy, then only they are brought to the centers. And we have different other centers. If they are young juveniles or nestlings, we keep them in nursery aviaries. And if they are 1 or 2 years old birds, they are kept in holding aviaries. So these are our biggest vultures are social birds, so they have to be kept in flock. And that we do in these colony aviary, where we keep birds which are more than 3 years old. And about 30 to 35 birds are kept in this aviary. So this is the main aviary where vultures form pairs. They also nest, and they have all different facilities to nest and breed. This aviary is open to the sky. They just have 2 netting. One, the netting at the below is soft netting of netlon, where vultures, even if they collide with it, they don't get injured. Then there are a number of water troughs, and there is a food hatch from where food is passed inside. And we have big windows for good ventilation. And when you keep birds in captivity, you have to give them a routine so they get used to captivity. And once they are used to captivity, they breed well. So we have a hatch from there where nesting material is also dropped in, and we have given them cots and ledges to nest on. There are other aviaries in the center, like display aviary, because our facilities are off display. They are not for public. So, but people do come to the center and they wanted to see vultures. So we keep some vultures in display aviary, where people can and see. And we have hospital aviaries. If a bird gets sick in the hospital, in the facilities, it's treated at the hospital aviaries. And we do have breeding aviaries where we thought we will keep individual pairs who find it difficult to breed in colony aviary situation. But we think that colony aviary is a much better place where the vultures like to breed. So all our vultures are tagged because, in a breeding program, you should have identification for all the vultures, and we have permanent identification because it's very good for keeping the genetics right. So we know which vulture is breeding with whom. So we have a wing tag. We also put a leg band, and we put a microchip in the breast muscles, which is a permanent source of identification. It is a passive chip which can be read with a microchip reader. And we keep all the morphometrics electronically in a program called ZIMS. So we have records of each and every bird right from the beginning, and we know their genetics as well. So we don't catch the birds very often. We catch them only once a year. We catch all the birds. And we have developed good lab facilities in the breeding centers because there are very few labs who can do avian work. So we had to develop all the facilities within the centers. So we have a facility to do hematology, biochemistry. And as you know, vultures are not sexually dimorphic. You cannot separate a male from a female. They look exactly alike. So we take their DNA from the blood and do sexing through their DNA. And we also have a microbiology lab, and we study their gut flora and fauna just to make sure when we treat them, we know which antibiotic to use. So we feed vultures on goat meat. We keep goats with us for 10 days. And this is just to make sure that even if the goats are treated with diclofenac, the diclofenac is excreted out within 72 hours. So we keep the goats with us for 10 days, and then we slaughter them, remove the skin, and feed the vultures. So we feed the vultures twice a week, and each vulture gets 4 kilos of meat per week, which works out to be 5% of his body weight. And vultures, we have to be very careful about diclofenac because diclofenac is as toxic to vultures as cyanides to humans. Even if 0.5 mg per kg of the body weight of vulture, if that much diclofenac is there, if the vulture gets that much diclofenac, it will die. So we have to take this precaution. And vultures they are social birds, so there is no hierarchy. The hungry bird is dominant, not the powerful one. As the hungry one comes, it's allowed to eat, and then other birds feed on it. And there's hardly never ever serious fights when they are feeding. And they are very fast feeders. They finish within 15-20 minutes, whatever the food is given to them. And we don't remove the skeletons immediately. We let the skeletons of the goats there for 15 days or so, because vultures, once they're fed on the meat, they feed on the bones because of their very high calcium requirement. So vultures usually like to take bath after feeding or whenever there's good sunshine, and they take bath only when you top up the water troughs every day, because they need to have fresh flowing water. And if you don't top it up every day, they don't take bath. And here also, it's almost one by one. There are no fights. And you will notice how thorough bath they take. And unlike their reputation that they always squabble and all, it's not true. They are very organized and systematic there, as you will notice from this. And whenever there's bright sunshine, the vultures, they spread their wings, and it is largely to shed ectoparasites and for thermoregulation. And in most of our aviaries, we had given them trees to rest on, but vultures' droppings are very acidic, and they kill all the trees, because where they were sit, they kill the trees. And so, but all vulture activities are synchronized, whether they are feeding, whether they are resting, whether they are sunning, they all do together. And you see how relaxed they are. This is in captive situation, and they are almost like in the wild. So if you have the right average size and you keep them properly, have proper ventilation, there's no problem in keeping these birds. And whenever there is good breeze blowing out, these birds do wing exercise. And if they can do this wing exercise, they keep their pectoral muscles in very good shape. And once, if you release them, if you keep them like this, and once these birds are released, they will fly immediately without any problem. So if the birds are kept in the right way, you can have a successful conservation breeding program, which can be good for the conservation of species. See how vigorous wing exercise they do whenever there is good breeze. And all the birds do the same activity together simultaneously. Even breeding, the time of breeding, they lay eggs almost at the same time in all the nest. So vultures are slow breeding and long living birds. So they start nesting only when they are 5 to 6 years old. But when they are 3 to 4 years old, they form pairs. So the male usually offers a twig to the female, and if female accepts it, they form a pair forever. But if one of them dies, it is almost replaced almost immediately. And once they form pairs, they identify a nesting ledge. They can make nest and also lay egg, but the fertile eggs are laid only when they are 5 to 6 years old. So nesting at the center happens as it happens in the wild. The nesting period starts from September onwards. So they have about 2 months of nest building period, and then they lay eggs in December. And then there's an incubation period of about 55 days, and the nestling stays on the nest for 4 months. So it's a long breeding cycle, and usually only 50% of the eggs produce adult birds. So the breeding success is very low. And these birds, we have CCTV cameras in all the aviaries, so there's very little human interaction. And because of the CCTV cameras, you can see all the activities, including egg laying by this bird, which they do it while standing. And the eggs are laid usually by during dusk and dawn. And incubation is done by both the parents. They share equal duties, both the male and female. And they have very long incubation shift, sometimes for 8 to 10 hours. And when they have long incubation shift, they tend to get stiffen up, and then they do wing exercise on the nest itself. You know, they lay egg during winters when it is very cold, it's almost freezing. So they never leave the nest alone. So if one bird goes to feed, the other birds is always on nest incubating. So this is how they do they stretch themselves and keep themselves fit in good conditions. So the chick, egg hatches in 55 days, and when the chick hatches, it has a very sparse coat of down, and it cannot thermoregulate. So the parents sit on it, which is called brooding, and this they do it till 45 days, till the chick develops the plumage and it can thermoregulate. But they start feeding the chick from the same day itself, and they bring food in the crop, which is at the base of the neck, and then they regurgitate, which the chick picks up on its own. So when the chick is born, it is it's only 150 grams, but within 4 months, it reaches about 4 to 5 kilos. So the growth is very fast, and the calcium requirement is very high. So these birds, they bring big bones in their crop, and they regurgitate, with the chick picks it up and swallows it whole. And because the pH, the gut pH is very acidic, it's almost 1 to 2, the bone gets dissolved very fast. And this is also one of the reasons that they can kill all bacteria and fungus from which they get from the carcasses. And whenever they are feeding the chicken, the parents are on the nest, and this is how it it takes out a big bone which the chick picks up and feeds on it. So just to meet this calcium requirement, you see how big bone it can swallow and digest also. So in 2 months' time, the chick should stand up. And if it is not able to stand up, then it has calcium deficiency. And if it has calcium deficiency, it can never stand up, and then it develops metabolic bone disease, which only is disastrous for the chick. So we make sure that the chicks always get good calcium supplemental. So since the vulture lay only 1 egg per year and only 50% reach to adulthood, so if the egg is lost within 3 weeks to a month, they tend to lay again, and we take advantage of this. So when the chick vultures lay egg, we remove the egg within 10 days or so and incubate it artificially. So when we go to take the eggs, we go in front of the birds, we climb up, we take the egg, we make sure we carry a box which is sturdy enough where the eggs doesn't shake, and then we bring the eggs to the incubator room where we incubate it, and the birds lay again within 3 weeks. So this is our incubator room, which is thermo-controlled, is kept at 19 to 21 degrees. And these are tabletop incubators, which are, and 4 eggs can be incubated in one incubator, and they rock, they have a cradle, so they rock on their own, and as well as we have to turn the eggs 3 times a day. And the vulture eggs are incubated on 36.3 to 36.9 degrees. And we have to be very careful about the temperature. Even an increase of 0.5 degrees can kill the embryo. So we have to be very careful in doing the incubation. So when we bring the eggs in, we do candling. When you do candling, you can, with a strong beam of light, you can actually see the development of embryo in the egg. And you can see blood vessels and all that. So we do candling every 6 days to monitor the progress of the development of embryo. The egg should ideally lose 14 to 17% of its weight from the time it is laid and the time it hatches. And if the weight loss is a physical process, because when metabolism takes place, the water vapors evaporates through the pores of the egg. And if the egg is not losing enough weight, so what we do is we drill the egg, and then the egg starts losing weight. And once we get the right weight loss, we again seal it. But if the egg is not losing enough weight, then we have to increase humidity. If it's losing more weight, then we have to increase the humidity in the incubator. So for 40 days, when you incubate the egg, it is not sure whether the egg has an embryo or not. But after 40 days, when you keep it in a firm surface, you will see the egg twitching. And that is when you realize that now the egg has embryo and it is fertile. And the egg starts calling when it is 15, the embryo starts calling when it's 50 days old. And then it cracks when it is about 53 days old, and then it hatches in 55 days old. So since all eggs are laid at the same time, we have eggs at the same stage. So when the egg cracks, we put it in hatcher, and at a very high humidity. And we keep all of them together, and humidity at this time is about 70 to 80%. And when the chick hatches, it hatches with a sparse coat of down, and we don't feed it for next 12.
I think we lost his connection here. Sorry,
We
we
just
can't
wait.
hear you. We just lost your voice.
I think your audio is. Dr. Prakash, yeah. Can you?
Can you hear me now again?
Yeah, he's back. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's some problem. So on the third, we start feeding it on mussels, and on the third day onwards, we feed it on different organs of the body like heart, brain, liver, and all of the goat, and we keep away. Calcium requirement. 1% of all the food is always calcium, so the chick gets lots of calcium for its growth. So we keep a very good eye on the weight gain of the chick, because chick is always hungry and you can always overfeed and kill a chick. But we make sure that on the first 3 days, the chick weight it increases only by 7%, and from 3rd day to 20th day by 9%. And then on from 40 days onwards on just by 2%. And if we can maintain this growth rate, the chick is fledges successfully. So it's very important to keep, after 3 days, it's important to keep chicks in sun, because they should get vitamin D3 for calcium assimilation. But we keep them initially for half an hour, and then the time increases, and then they are kept out in sun throughout the day. So when the chick is about 10 days old, we give the chick back to the parents and take the second clutch. And this is what is called chick swapping. And the parents, they accept the chick immediately, because vultures don't have olfactory sense, so they don't know whether it's their own chick or somebody else's chick. We can foster rear also. And so we take the second egg, and then we incubate it, and then rear the chick ourselves. So this is how we have been able to increase the productivity in captivity in vultures. So the chicks are always raised in groups to avoid imprinting, So the chicks, their eyesight is not developed till they are 10 days old, but beyond that, whoever they see, they will think that they are their parents. So we make sure that after their 10 days, they don't see us much. They see each other and they imprint on each other for their growth and avoid imprinting. So we mark all these birds with rings, so we know the identification of all the chicks, and we also microchip them. So, one of the chick is reared by us and one by the parents, and there's absolutely no difference in the behavior if you rear them properly, and they are as good as a chick raised in the wild. So now we have a good number of vultures. We have over 700 vultures in captivity, but you will notice that the most of the vultures are in Pinjore, Buxa, Rani, and Bhopal, the centers which are run by Bombay Natural Society. Rest of the centers are run by in the state zoos by the Central Zoo Authority and the state zoos. And we have managed to breed good number of vultures. And Pinjore, we have bred the highest number of vultures because we also practice double artificial incubation and double clutching. And now we realize that the prevalence of diclofenac has really gone down because of the conservation measures taken, and with the ban on diclofenac, and also on ban on the multi-dose vials for human use. which was done in 2015. So we have now thought of doing reintroduction program of vultures. So we are doing a soft release of vultures in the wild. So our centers are off display. So we don't let public come into the center, but when you have to do a release program, you need public support. So that's why we invited public figures to release the vultures in the wild. So first step in a soft release program is to release vultures in a pre-release aviary, which is constructed in the area where the vultures have to be released in the wild. So we invited the Honorable Chief Minister of Haryana to release these vultures in the pre-release aviary. So in this pre-release aviary, we also attract, just outside pre-release aviary, we also attract the free-ranging vultures, because we want that our captive bred vultures and the free-ranging vultures have enough interaction. And once they have good interactions, once the captive bred vultures are released in the wild, they will join the wild flock because they are social bird. And then their chances of survival will be very good, because they will be able to find food and avoid predators. So, we had kept vultures in captivity, and we knew that once we release them in the wild, they will be able to fly. But there was some skepticism among people that the vultures kept in captivity for a long period of time will not be able to fly and find food. So what we did, we first released 2 Himalayan griffins, which were not critically endangered, and they were in captivity with us for 10 years. So we first released them in wild. So we invited the Union Minister. So he released these 2 vultures in wild on the 3rd of June, 2016. So, when we opened the netting remotely from a hide, and we were expecting, and we also provided food and water, and we had attracted wild birds, and we were expecting the vultures will go out immediately. But for 24 hours, they didn't go out. But then it went out, and you see how effortlessly it went out and flew out. And then we also provided food to these vultures, and they would come and accept this food, and they will feed with white vultures. As you see, the big vultures with a wing tag is the vulture which we had released. And those days we didn't have permission to put a satellite tag, so we could not put a satellite tag. We just had a wing tag. And within a month or so, this vulture started flying. It started soaring, and it could find its own food and water. And we were very happy with this, the success of the release of this vulture. And you will notice this vulture is not colliding with the trees or man-made structure. And it was also trying to get the thermals to get a lift to start flying. And since we had not put any tracking device on it, we could only follow it for 45 days based on the wing tags which it had. And but because of the success of this experiment, we have now started releasing other birds, our captive, critically endangered captive vultures also in the wild. So we released 8 vultures in the wild. So 8 oriental white-backed vultures. So 4 of these vultures, we had put satellite transmitters, that is the PTTs, as backpacks, and 4 we were the GPS transmitters which work on mobile phone technology, and we had put as backpacks, and then we had released them in the wild. But before releasing them in the wild, we had done studies in 100 kilometers area from the release aviary, making sure that there is enough food, less prevalence of toxic drugs, and there is no other threat to the vultures. So this is how we had put the tracking devices on the back as backpacks. And then on 8th October 2020, we remotely lifted the nesting and let the birds go out. And this also we did it by inviting the Haryana Forest Minister to do it. And we kept provisioning food for wild vultures as well as for captive bred vultures. So then another 48 hours or so, no vultures went out. Then we were hoping that the vultures will gradually come out, join the white flock, and then they will go with them. But nothing like that happened. They came out one by one, and they took almost 15, 20 days to come out, all of them to leave the aviary. And in the meantime, if the wild vultures will also come and join these vultures in the aviary because they have food and water.
Vibhu, we'll have to, we've got a lot of questions. So how much more?
But I will just conclude very.
Thank you.
So these vultures, they joined the wild vultures very quickly, and they could find their own food and water. So they are now in about 100 kilometers radius from the center, and they could fly well. We have lost 3 birds so far, but not to their mortality is not due to drug-related issues. So we also, because we have tracking devices, so we know where the vultures are, and so we can go and put out food if they have not eaten food. But you can make out whether the vultures have eaten or not by observing its crop. So 2 of the vultures also, they still come close to the center, and they started nesting. But unfortunately, the nesting was disturbed by monkeys. But we hope that now they will start nesting, and once their progenies will be totally wild, and that they will form a population of vultures. So now we have also started releasing from West Bengal Vulture Center also. So as I said, we monitored habitat in 100 kilometers radius. We monitored the wild vulture population, food availability, habitat availability, prevalence of drugs before we release the vultures in the wild. And we did undercover pharmacy survey to find out what are the drugs being used to treat cattle. And we found that meloxicam was becoming popular and diclofenac use was going down. But we had concern with 2 other drugs which we have found toxic, the nimesulide and aceclofenac, which are also becoming popular. And we are trying to get these drugs also banned. We found that food was not a problem. There was a lot of food, and most of the carcasses we got was not attended to by even other scavengers. Some of them were attended to by dogs. And we also do advocacy and awareness program by calling drug controller and animal husbandry commissioner to the center, explaining to them what all is happening and what is required from them to help us in saving vultures. And also stakeholders from other departments, we do regular awareness programs. And now Government of India has released the Vulture Conservation Action Program, and they have rightly identified that the drugs are a main problem for vultures, and that they have prepared a plan of how, if the drugs are found to be toxic, they should be banned immediately, and the untested drugs should be tested for safety tested on vultures. And they also want to have conservation breeding program for red-headed and Egyptian vulture. So we are not alone. We have a lot of support from different organizations. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash. As mentioned, and in the chat by many people, I would like to corroborate that. It's an excellent and very, very inspiring presentation. Working in the field of conservation, we only hear horror stories and sad stories. So, I think first and foremost, a big round of applause from all of us, and thank you on all our behalf for fighting for this species for close to 40 years. So it's a very hope-inspiring process that you've gone through. Thank you so much for doing that from all of us. There are a set of questions. If you'd like to take a quick sip of water, then we'll jump into them.
Sure, no, I'm fine. I can do it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first, I'd like to take a question from.
Shall I stop sharing the screen?
Yes, please. Thank you. So Dr. Dilip K has asked 2 questions. I'll combine them. Little privileges of the moderator. So first he's asked is, what is the status of vultures in Kerala, especially Wayanad? And he's observed that there are recent sightings of Egyptian vultures in Ernakulam and Thrissur, where they're attracted to chicken waste discarded in open. And is this a good sign for vulture conservation, from a vulture conservation point of view?
Well, yes, I know there's a population of vultures in Wayanad. It is being also monitored. And the problem of vulture conservation across the country was the use of these drugs, and and now, of course, the usage of these because the prevalence of these of diclofenac has come down, so we are seeing revival in population in different parts. And I know Wayanad population is also being monitored by one Mr. Shashi Kumar, and he has found that the population is stable, and which is a very good sign. And Egyptian vultures do feed on poultry waste, and they feed on various other. Their food diversity is much wider than what the gyp species have, and they do feed on poultry waste, and as I said, on scats of mammalian carcasses, and also, and well, the only problem with poultry waste that there is always more likelihood of transmission of disease from bird to bird than from mammals to bird. So poultry is not a very safe option for bird scavengers. And that's what I will say.
Thank you. The next question is from Farida Tampal in Hyderabad, who's with WWF.
Thank you, Dr. Vidhu.
Farida has pointed out that the Hyderabad vulture conservation breeding has not worked too well, and birds are too old, and there has hardly been any success to talk about. They need young adults with good breeding vigor, but they're not being able to procure these. So that was one part of her observation, and if you'd like to comment. And there are two other parts that she's put in, that how well do vultures adapt when they're released as far as finding carrion is concerned. So I think you've already covered that part in your presentation, that they've been doing pretty well. The second part is, would you need a vulture restaurant to be made available as a part of a soft release?
Well, the first question about vulture restaurants, usually you need them when there is areas where you have food shortage or something. And if you have a vulture restaurant, you have to be very careful that you don't put carcasses with drugs in it. So, a vulture restaurant means in an area where there's food concentration and birds and all will get attracted to it, they will frequent that area. And if there's only one carcass with poison or something, it can kill a large number of vultures. So we should do vulture restaurant when it's absolutely necessary. And if you do it, we have to be very careful. And the problem is you cannot be sure that a carcass has diclofenac or any other drug till you test it, which is very difficult. You have to get a sample, send it to a lab which has all the instruments and all, which is not practical to do it. So I'm not very comfortable having a vulture restaurant.
Thank you. Somebody's
Me. Please mute me. Mute it.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is by Mr. Adhiraj Dutt. He asks that would eagles and hawks are also part of the same chain, and I would like to add to that are they also getting affected by diclofenac or any such drug that we have? Has something like that been observed?
Well, we really think that most of the extrapredatory, most of the raptors are likely to be affected by diclofenac. We have now evidence that steppe eagle is also susceptible to diclofenac, and we got some steppe eagle in Rajasthan in Jorbir, and we found that they had similar symptoms, visceral gout, and they had presence of diclofenac. So they do appear to be susceptible. And in fact, very few species has been really tested for diclofenac toxicity, because it was the first time that anybody found out that a pharmaceutical is toxic or killing wildlife. But it depends on metabolism. All species are not susceptible. Like, for example, American black vulture is not susceptible. like crows are not susceptible. Chicken dies only when you give 20-25 times the normal dose of cattle. So it all depends on metabolism of different species.
Mr. Manish Vaidya from Gujarat is asking whether he works in wildlife law and wants to know the status of vultures in Gujarat. So I apologize, to participants that, every state numbers and status is going to be a little difficult to explain to, but he's asking very interestingly is that if there are any legal case or legal provisions that are there towards vulture conservation and protection, if you can highlight that.
Well, recently there has been a writ petition in High Court of Delhi. Okay, now we have found that there are 3 other drugs, nimesulide, isofenac, and ketoprofen, have been also proved to be toxic to vultures. And they have ideally should be banned for veterinary use, but they have not been banned so far. So this is petition which asked them for has questioned that. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Ankit Shukla has asked a very interesting question that what is the status of king vultures in India? And has there been attempts to conserve them similarly by conservation breeding?
Well, king vultures is also now critically endangered, and its population has declined by over 90% from what it was in early 90s. And then, Action Plan of Vultures has also recommended its conservation breeding. And in UP, in Gorakhpur, they are establishing a center for conservation breeding of king vulture. Although it is not clearly established that this species is also dying because of NSA contamination, but there are all likelihood that it also suffers from NSA contamination.
Thank you. Since we have just 2 more minutes, I'm going to take, jump in and, take the control of things. So firstly, thank you. I'm Anand Pindarkar, and thank everyone on behalf of, the Toon School, and thank Dr. Vibhu Prakash. But before we leave Dr. Vibhu Prakash, how can we as citizens, contribute in the conservation of vultures? What is it that we should do? And is there anywhere where we can contribute information, or how can we all get involved in this process?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. One thing I want to say, we need to have best practices in whatever we do, especially, in veterinary care. We should be treating animals and all. Only trained veterinarians and all should treat cattle, and make sure that, one thing which we have found out that routinely the animals are heavily overdosed, sometimes as much as 35 times the normal veterinary dose. And it is because, when trained people don't treat, this is what happens, and that makes the carcasses toxic to scavengers, because, toxicity is dose dependent. So that's one of the things which we can do. And other thing is, if you come across dead vultures, they tell, the real story of what is happening to the species. And so if they come across dead vultures, that should be, if they can be reported to the forest department, and then if we can be sent tissues and all can be sent to us, so we know what it's still killing the vultures.
But individuals should not collect specimens.
They should not collect.
Forest department, definitely.
The forest department. And then, if a breeding colony is sighted or something, it was nice to send us information. I can send you the link on where you can put on the information.
Right. So we will share Dr. Vibhu Prakash's, if you don't mind, your email address, and
most welcome. Yeah.
This recording will also be, edited, and then we'll share the link also, so that others who could not attend it or who joined in late can definitely be able to hear the entire presentation. So I would hand over to Kavita ji for the formalities. And thank you,
Arush.
Yeah.
Arush, I'd like to.
Thank you, sir, for joining us. From the Toon School Worldwide Society, we're privileged to have you here. and we will all try to work towards helping out in whatever we can, both from a citizen perspective and both as corporate. So thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for being here. Kavita, over to you.
Yeah, Dr. Prakash, that was a most amazing presentation. There was so much to learn. It was very simply conveyed, but there was such a systematic scientific method involved in conserving the vultures. And I can't tell you how much value it added to our knowledge. Thank you so much for this very valuable presentation. Anand Pindharkar, Senior Wildlife Biologist, thank you for being a super moderator. Arush Sugani, thank you very much. DSOBS and DOSCO Natural Connections, who organized this webinar, and to each and every participant who attended, thank you so much for your very valuable presence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Happy weekend.
Thank you.
Hi, Arush. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
My name is Bangalore.
Sorry, I'm losing you in the middle. I can't hear you.
One second. Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. Big fan of Vibhu sir. I think he just left, but we've interviewed him earlier, and I've also spoken with a few of the specialists. Vibhu sir, hi. I had interviewed you 1 or 2 years back, Raptor festival to create awareness on raptors. We have. I'm a Rotractor, and through Rotract we managed to create awareness about vulture conservation. And we've taken all the inputs from Vibhu sir and all the specialists, Chris Bowden and few others from the conservation faculties, if you could say. So I've shared a YouTube link of the small animation. It's our effort to create awareness to people on vulture conservation, a 5-minute animation in Kannada with English subtitles, where people can understand what's the actual problem that's facing the vultures, and how we can be a part of the solution, how small steps that we can take can actually bring in a lot of impact, and we can result in saving a species, key critical species who are probably the unofficial Swachh Bharat ambassadors, the vultures. So you can request you to please have a look of the video. I've shared the link on the chat section. If you have the time, you could have shared it. Could have screen shared and shown it right away. It's just 4-5 minutes. We did the world premiere a year back. It was launched by Ricky Cage, the UN ambassador and Grammy Award winner who works on environment. Would you like to see it, Arush? Would you want to see the animation if you have the time? Otherwise, we can just share the link.
Share the link, because we'll put the link off. Because people 7:15 was a hard stop for us, but we'll have a look for sure.
I've shared the link. Please do share it, and would love to touch base. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will share it with the other groups as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.